square roots and cubed roots. That is what we're going to be talking about in today's lesson. You'll have to excuse my voice. I lost it doing too much teaching and coaching. But what is a square root? A square root, the square root of a number is one of its two equal factors. So when we think of two numbers that are multiplied to equal a number, a square root is unique in that the factors are equal. You have two equal factors. For example, if I have the number 64, well, what are some factors that could make up 64? I could do 1 times 64. I could do 2 times 32. I could do 4 times 16. And I could do 8 times 8. Notice there is only one pair where the factors are equal. What that means then is number 8 is the square root of 64, because 8 times 8 equals 64, and both of the factors are equal. So if I am asked to find the square root of 64, I'm looking for the factor that's multiplied by itself to get that 64. So there's a couple ways we can do that. You can do some guess and check by putting factor pairs such like this, or you can use the lovely little radical sign that will be on your computer or on your calculator, and that is going to save a lot of time. So let's do a couple of these problems and see how we do with square roots. Example number 1 says find the square root of 81. Well, so I've got to think to myself, what number multiplied by itself will equal 81? Well, if you're good with your times tables, you should be able to recognize that 9 times 9 equals 81. Therefore, the square root of 81 equals 9. Also, you can use the square root button on your calculator, as we mentioned earlier, to be able to help you find that. So that would be a very basic example. If they ask you for the square root, what is the factor that's multiplied by itself to equal that number? Now here we have something slightly different. We have an interesting symbol in front of our radical sign. This simply means the positive and the negative square root. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, let's go back to our example of 81. If I do 9 times 9, I get 81. If I do negative 9 times negative 9, I also get 81. So the square root of 81 could be positive 9 or negative 9. So this symbol here, plus or minus, simply means the positive or the negative square root. So what is the square root of 1.44? Well, if we put 1.44 in our calculator and find the square root of it, we will find that it is 1.2. If you notice, if you move those decimal points a little bit, you have 144, which the square root of that is 12. If you're wondering why that looks familiar, that might be why. So an easy shortcut usually is, if I have plus or minus in front of the radical sign, then I should see plus or minus in front of my answer. So I know that the square root of 1.44 can be positive or negative 1.2. So let's look at yet another example and try to make sure we cover all our bases. Now this one is interesting because it has two things to think about. First of all, it is a fraction. Second of all, there's a negative sign out front. If the negative sign is in front of the radical sign, ignore it for the meantime, take care of everything underneath the radical sign, and then apply the negative afterwards. Now, when I'm finding the square root of a fraction, I can essentially rewrite this as the square root of 16 over the square root of 81. Many students want to turn 16 over 81 into a decimal and then find the square root of that, and you usually end up with irrational numbers. This way, you get a nice, clean fraction. Now, the square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 81, as we already know, is 9. So our answer would be 4 over 9, but don't forget, I need this negative sign to be in the front. Therefore, my final answer would be negative 4 over 9. So once again, don't forget to apply the negative after you find the answer. And if underneath the radical sign is in the form of a fraction, simply find the square root of the numerator and then the square root of the denominator. All right, one more example, and then we'll move on to let you work by yourself. The last example is a little bit different. If you notice, we used to have a negative sign in front of the radical. Now it's underneath the radical. Well, this is probably your easiest problem to answer. And the answer is going to be there is no real solution. There is no answer to this problem. And let me explain why. If I want to get 49, I could do 7 times 7. I could do negative 7 times negative 7. And that would give me positive 49. But if I want to get negative 49, I would have to have a negative 7 times a positive 7. And if you notice, negative 7 and positive 7 are not the same factors. There is no way that I can multiply something by itself and come up with a negative answer. So anything with the negative sign under the radical, remind we're just talking square roots here, is no real solution. Okay, thank you for listening to those different variety of problems involving square roots. Now I want you to try the got it problems that are kind of in the middle of the page. Right below examples 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would like you to try got it A, B, C, and D.